The United States 2000's presidential election was the 54th presidential election held on Tuesday, November 7, 2000. Al Gore, the Democratic candidate, and George Bush, the Republican candidate. Bush won the dispute election, defeating Gore. This election was considered one of the closest elections in history, not including the most recent election. George W. Bush achieved an election night majority by 1,784 votes, a very close margin. Due to the closeness of the race and irregularities such as hanging chads, the Gore campaign successfully advocated for a recount of certain ballots. Protesting broke out in Miami-Dade County and was one of the counties where ballots were recounted. It also ordered that every county in Florida must immediately begin manually recounting all undervotes, because there were enough contested ballots to place the outcome of the election in doubt. The Supreme Court decision allowed the previous vote certification made by Florida's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, to stand for George W. Bush, who thereby won the Florida's 25 electoral votes. Florida's votes gave Bush, the Republican candidate, 271 electoral votes, one more than the 270 required to win the Electoral College. In the 2020 elections that have been vastly compared to the 2000s elections, Trump seemingly tried to temper his initial statement, refusing to accept the election results. Many compared this election with the controversial 2000s one, saying it took us 37-plus days in an election back in 2000. The outcome of this election is similar to what happened in the 2000s, when George W. Bush's victory over Al Gore wasn't determined until a Supreme Court decision on December 12th of that year. This is very similar to Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
Albert Honored Gore Jr. is known as an American politician and environmentalist who served as the 45th Vice President of the United States. Gore was Bill Clinton's running mate before running for president, serving 2 terms. Gore won the national popularity vote of the 2000 election, but he lost the Electoral College vote after a legal battle over dispute vote counts in the state of Florida. George received 267 pledges electorally. This election is still one of the most controversial in all of American history. There are many books on the market about the confusion of this election, but the one in particular that's looked back on, Bush vs. Gore, The Court Cases and Commentary, written by E.D. Dion and William Crystal, gathers most significant opinions and pieces from journalists and scholars on both sides of the political fence. This book defines hanging chads, butterfly ballots, endless recounts, and all the raucous allegations that turned this election into a constitutional crisis. After an intense recount process and the United States Supreme Court's decision, President Bush won Florida's electoral votes by a margin of only 537 votes out of almost 6 million cast, and as a result became the president-elect. The Florida vote was ultimately settled in Bush's favor by a margin of 537 votes when the U.S. Supreme Court in Bush v. Gore stopped a recount that had been initiated upon as ruling by the Florida Supreme Court. George W. Bush became the 43rd President of the United States from 2001 to 2009. Whether the Florida Supreme Court established a new standard for resolving presidential election contests, it violated Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution and failed to comply with 3 U.S.C. Section 5, and whether the use of the standards of manual recounts violated the Equal Protection and Dual Process Clause. This case concerned the certification of Florida elect results in the 2000 presidential election, following a complaint and complete disregard of legal votes and undervotes. Chief Justice Rehnquist filled a concerning opinion. Joined by the Justices Thomas and Scalia, Justice Stevens, Salter, Ginsburg, and Breyer filled the separate dissenting opinions. This issue was truly never solved, and there is no such thing as a compromise when selecting a president. The question in discussion is, did the Florida Supreme Court violate Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the U.S. Constitution, making a new election law?
Do standardless manual recounts violate the equal protection and due process of the clauses of the Constitution? Noting that the Equal Protection Clause guarantees individuals that their ballot cannot be devalued, the per curiam opinion held 7-2 that the Florida Supreme Court's scheme for recounting ballots was unconstitutional.
Even though the recount seems reasonable, It was not, because there are different ways and procedures that different countries use for voting. The court held a 4-5 no constitutional recount should be made up in such a short amount of time given.
The recount scheme was also unconstitutional because the Florida Supreme Court's decision made new election laws. This is completely wrong and in no way reasonable for Florida to do. Supreme Court's decisions made new election law, which only state legislature may do.
The president's allegations and conspiracy theories of voter fraud were without merit. Fraud is hard to pull off in modern elections, so Al Gore had already lost before the unconstitutional recount.
Well said, Dane. A supremely bad decision. However, in the case at hand, the crucial point is simply that although the recount was unconstitutional, as ordered by the Florida court, it is entirely possible to conceive a recount that would be constitutional. At a minimum, it would require county-wide standards for assessing voter intent, with impartial judges working under clear instructions to make the final decision on any contested ballots, and if the court felt it necessary, it could order statewide standards as well, which obviously was not executed.
In decision, the court's majority did not deny that such a legal recount was possible. Instead of acknowledging this option, it was done completely wrong, causing such an intense issue. The court then, undermining its own power and relevance, casted doubt on the role of the entire legal system that the Supreme Court represents.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you were educated. Signing off, Dana Bailey.